Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lori Prince in Seattle University's Parent and Family Engagement Office. Welcome to our webinar about helping your student overcome academic challenges. Today we have our student persistence specialist, Yvette Gutierrez Morfin, who is going to talk with you about how you can support your student if they're encountering any challenge in their academics. And we know as students start college that that's quite a possibility for many of them. We will have time for you to ask questions. There's a little chat box on the bottom of your screen you should be able to log into. And if you'd like to pose a question during the webinar, please do, and Yvette will try to get to them. So without further ado, I will pause and turn the headset over to my colleague.
Hello, everyone. Like Lori said, my name is Yvette Gutierrez Morfin. I am the Student Persistence Specialist here at Seattle U. And in this presentation, if you went to the orientation session for parents, you might have heard me talk about growth mindset. But I really wanted to dig a little bit more into what that means and offer some practical kind of skills for you guys as you kind of talk with your students. If you have a question at any point, please feel free to use the chat box. I'll try to answer them as they come, but there will definitely be time left over at the end for questions as well. All right. All right. Screen issues. Just to check in first, can you guys use the chat box and let me know if you guys are able to see my screen? We're having a little bit of technical difficulties on our end, folks. Please just thank you for your patience and give us a few seconds while we try to figure out the screen sharing piece of this. Okay, it looks like we've got some of our technical difficulties figured out, folks. So we're going to go ahead and get going. Like I mentioned, this presentation is going to dig a little bit more into this idea of growth mindset and offer some practical skills as you're speaking with your students about how to encourage them to have that growth mindset and persevere when they face challenges in the classroom. So we're just really getting at this question of what motivates students to try hard in school. And we know that your student is at SU, so the chances are that they did well in high school, and that but there's a difference between doing well because it was easy and doing well because it was challenging. So we're asking the question of when things are challenging, if a student hasn't been challenged in an academic setting before, what can we do to motivate them to continue trying? And that's really where growth mindset and achievement comes in. There's a ton of research that's showing a relationship between mindset and the overall achievement a student has in the classroom. Um, Basically, students' beliefs about intelligence and whether it is fixed or whether it is something that grows can have a huge impact on motivation, their behaviors. So whether students are taking academic risks, whether they see effort as and studying as something worth doing, whether they seek help. It informs their responses to challenges and setbacks, and overall, it just has a huge impact on academic achievement. So growth mindset was really developed by a psychologist at Stanford by the name of Carol Dweck. She has a book out that that you guys are welcome to check out. Basically, students with a fixed mindset are born believe that they are born with a certain set of abilities and talents that can't really be changed. So when you come up against an obstacle that you can't overcome, you tend to think it's impossible to get better at it. And we see some of the consequences of that play out when students, for example, get very unmotivated to study or to work hard after getting a grade that they maybe don't like because they feel that um, their talents are fixed and no amount of effort is going to make a difference. Where we want students to be is more in the growth mindset, where there's a belief that academic abilities can be developed and that the more effort you put into it, the better you'll be. It's this idea that you can kind of practice at school and grow your skills. Um, so an example of what growth mindset would sound like is this math class sounds challenging, so I'm going to make an appointment at the tutoring center, whereas someone with a fixed mindset might say something along the lines of, I've just never been good at math. So these beliefs kind of act like lenses through which students interpret their day-to-day experiences in school, and especially experiences of adversity. They basically can draw very different conclusions about what each thing means or what each event would mean based on the mindset that they have. So going back to my previous example, the meaning of a difficulty in math class can either mean like I have to go to tutoring or I've just never been good at math, so nothing I do is going to make a difference. And sometimes these are subconscious, like students aren't aware that a lot of their actions go back to their mindset. So there's a chance for staff and for parents to really intervene and make a difference. But I want to go into a little bit what the consequences of these two different beliefs look like. So these are just three areas where it can have an effect. This is by no means exhaustive, but it will give you a good idea of kind of how a fixed mindset and a growth mindset might play out in the classroom. So in a fixed mindset, your goal in school is to look smart, whereas in a growth mindset, your goal in school is to learn. Um, when you want to look smart, it's all about perception, right? So the main thing you want to do when you do your schoolwork is show how good you are at it. You're looking for kind of outside approval. Whereas in a growth mindset, your goal in school is just to learn. You're focused much more on that personal growth and on growing your own skills. You're not as concerned as that perception. Uh, and then this scope plays into how students see the value of effort. Someone in a fixed mindset would view effort as negative because if you have to put in the effort to be good at something, then it means that you weren't born naturally with that talent. Whereas someone with a growth mindset, they see effort as positive. There is value in that hard work because it means that you'll be better at something afterwards. And then finally, and again, this is where academically we want to have the most impact, response to failure. Someone with a fixed mindset will feel like they should give up. It might sound like I'm not going to try to take this subject ever again in a class, or they might try to cheat on the next test because the focus isn't on learning, it's on, again, on that perception. Whereas someone with a growth mindset would react in a more resilient manner. They would want to work harder in that class from now on or spend more time studying for the test. One theme you can draw out from that is that in a fixed mindset, you're more focused on the perception, whereas in a growth mindset, you're focused on the process. So you value the effort and the work put into to learning something more than the end goal itself in some cases. Now, mindsets can change. So even if a student happens to be in a fixed mindset right now, that doesn't mean that they have to stay there. And the next few slides are going to hopefully give you a couple of tips on how you can speak with your student to help coach them into more of this growth mindset. Carol Dweck found in her study that students who have a growth mindset end up doing much better than students who are fixed. So from a student perspective, this is what I would say to students to help build some of that perseverance and resilience. It's not too late now to even just start building a support network on campus, reaching out to tutoring centers, to people in class, just anyone really, so that students can see, like, you know, they're not the only ones having potentially some academic difficulties. It's fairly common throughout the college experience, but it can be very debilitating if a student feels isolated, and it can be hard to persevere if they feel like they're the only ones going through that. So again, just building that support network. I also like to tell students to focus on what they can control. So if they're noting that, for example, they're falling behind on their classwork, they're in complete control of their schedule. They can determine how much time they spend studying versus how much time they spend on Netflix, for example. And even if they are having some difficulty seeing where they might be able to cut back on some of that time spent doing other things, there's resources on campus to help them kind of map out their schedule so that they might be able to devote more time to putting in the work necessary to do well in school. The third thing I tell students is to think about past examples of growth mindset. Again, if you went to my orientation session, you might have heard me say one example of this is that for a lot of students at one point, long division was the hardest thing in the world, but through practice and effort, they were able to master that. So there's no reason why that same practice and effort can't be applied to situations now. And then finally, emphasizing the benefits of taking academic risks and being proactive about accessing resources kind of go hand in hand. If you're in a growth mindset and you're valuing the process and the effort, academic risks taking academic risks shifts from being a potential source of embarrassment to a real learning opportunity. And oftentimes, you might not even know you need a resource until you're taking those academic risks and realizing that perhaps you're not as you're not comprehending the material as well as you think. From a parent perspective, these are just a few general tips that you can use when you're speaking to your student. One of the biggest things with growth mindset is whether or not you're praising a quality that is stable versus effort and strategies and like the processes I've been saying. So one of the common things I hear is like students will say, I'm dumb or I'm smart, or praise will often be focused, and I do this with my own nephew of like, wow, you must be so smart. But to really encourage that growth mindset, we want to praise things like the effort and strategies used. So that might sound like, I like how you try to find a new way to solve that, and noticing how students have gotten better with practice. So you've been practicing and I can see that it's paying off. And then really emphasizing that mistakes and being challenged are necessary as part of learning. This perhaps I think is the most important because it takes away some of that fear of being wrong or people seeing you be wrong. So noticing and pointing out to students that mistakes are an opportunity to learn, and that can be when the most learning happens, is when you're challenged and you do something wrong, but then you find a new way to do it and eventually master the skill. Another really good thing to do is to ask students to reframe some of the fixed mindset language. So if you ever hear a student say, I'm dumb, ask them to reframe and say, like, well, what am I missing? It's not that they're dumb, it's just that maybe they're missing a skill, or maybe they're missing an important learning resource. Maybe they're missing tutoring, maybe they're missing office hours, right? It's not anything inherently fixed about them. It's just, what are the steps I'm not taking? Um, Another thing you might hear is, I'm naturally good at this, so like it was easy for me. I didn't really have to put in a lot of effort. Something parents can say, or parents can ask their students to reframe that to be more of a, how can I keep improving? If this wasn't a challenge for me, what can I do to find a challenge so that I'm getting the most out of my time here? Fine. This slide is more about modeling how to learn from failure. So one thing I do with students that I think would be very helpful for parents is to share personal instances of failure. Situations where maybe things didn't go well, but you were able to find a new strategy or deal with it in a way that lets you come out better in the end. Definitely want to be mindful of the language you're using. As I'm reading this now, even, it's not a question. Probably shouldn't use the word failure. It should have been like, it's just a misstep in the journey. But encourage the student to share what they think you should do next time. And that way, it's kind of encouraging them to think about when something goes wrong in their own lives or in their own academic lives. They've already kind of started that process of thinking about the future. What should I do next? Rather than saying like, well, I failed, that's that's the end, and then moving on from there. And then definitely don't underestimate the power of the word yet. It really focuses for students and helps them realize that this is not the end, that there is something to follow, and it gives them back some of that agency to take steps to do better the next time. Uh, it's also important to keep the big picture in mind. So remind students that they don't have to get things right away, that stumbles are definitely part of the learning process. Um, Ask them to think about, what is the overall goal of learning? What is the point of it all? And it isn't necessarily to get 100% on that homework every single time, or 90% on that quiz every single time. It's to grow, it's to get better. And the only way that can happen sometimes is by making those mistakes and then trying things differently. So just as you're having conversations with your students, encourage them to keep that end goal in mind. Another thing parents can do is really emphasize the importance of putting in effort. So if a student does let you know that they did well, but it wasn't really difficult for them, it's definitely okay to praise that, to praise their successes, but try to avoid praise, again, based on those immutable traits. So um, rather than saying, um, you know, you, you must be super smart and that's why it was easy for you, ask them about the strategies they used. Why wasn't it challenging? Do they feel like they got everything they could have gotten out of that activity, or is there something more challenging they could have done that would have been more worthwhile? If the opposite happens and the student puts in the effort but maybe doesn't get the result that they want, praise the attempt. Again, you're trying to take away the stigma of failure or making a mistake being a bad thing, and instead focus on what can be done for next time. This can sound like, I saw that you really worked hard on that, and I really appreciate the effort you put in. That's a great skill to have. What do you think are some new strategies we can try next time? And these are just some final thoughts as you're speaking with your students to try to encourage growth mindset and encourage them to persevere through some of their academic challenges. Again, just frame mistakes as part of the learning process and encourage your students to frame mistakes as part of the learning process. If you ever hear some of that language that's a little bit more in the fixed mindset, think of the brain as something that grows, and this is actually straight from Carol Dweck's research. The brain is very elastic. It's very much like a muscle. So the more it is challenged and the more effort and practice is put in, the stronger the brain will eventually become. Thirdly, emphasize the belief that risk is okay. Again, it's part of the learning process. So we're trying to remove that fear of being perceived as not smart or looking dumb in front of the professor, right? That's part of the learning process, and it really, most learning will happen in those moments. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, praise effort and process over the results. So we want to encourage students to keep trying and to keep working hard. So focusing more on that effort and the practice that students are putting in will encourage them to be more in that growth mindset setting. These are just a few of the resources available on campus for students. Learning assistance programs and Writing Center on the Math Lab are all in Lemieux Library. And again, as we're encouraging students to get in this growth mindset and practice their skills, these three resources are great for students as they're trying to get out of that fixed mindset. My office does some work around this. And then finally, academic advisors and professors can be great resources when students are feeling like they're just not sure, or they don't, as they're struggling with facing academic challenges and they don't know where to turn. And then lastly, this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out at any point if you have any questions. And I will get back to you as soon as I can. Are there any questions now? Please feel free to use the chat box and I'll try to answer them as they come in. All right, well, it doesn't look like there's any questions now, but again, if you think of any later, please, oh, there's one. How do students access learning assistance programs? Thanks for that question. Students can access learning assistance programs either online or actually in person by going to the desk on the second floor of the library. If students want to go online, they can take what's called the Tutoring Needs Assessment on the Learning Assistance Program's website. And basically all advisors have access to that. So if students just can't find it, they can definitely go to their advisor. All right, well, if you guys think of any questions later on, again, my contact information is up here. Please feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you guys so much.